Good morning. We are grateful on behalf of our team from Uchee Pines to Pastor Dean, to the leadership, to the health team of this church for allowing this event to take place. It's a great blessing for us. And we are very privileged to be here with you today because we are learning with you. Together as we are sharing, we are talking about it to ourselves. Florida is a wonderful place because when we come here, we're not only enjoying the warmth of sun, but also the warmth of hearts. And this church is a special, very peculiar church. We can see God's presence, and the warmth of your hearts is seen and felt. So we're grateful for that. Now, God gives us at creation perfect control over our will. He made us in such a way that our body controls our mind and our minds controls our body. It's all interconnected. Now, God asks us, what do you want? What do you want? And we, as Christians who read the Bible, we say, we want to do your will, O God. And God asks again, what do you want? And again we say, we want to do your will. And then he asks again and again, what do you want? And we continue saying, we want to do your will, but something is in between us and God. And something makes God to continue asking this question because there is something that interferes with us surrendering our will to God, because this is the condition. He wants us to give Him our will so that we would be able to do His will, His biddings, and to follow His word. And today we will look with you at things that are very pertinent to this issue. So, what is mind-body connection? Your body responds to the way you think, feel, and act. And this is called mind-body connection. In Genesis chapter 2 and chapter 1, we read that God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And man became a living soul. And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Then in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 we read that then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. What is the spirit here? What is Solomon talking about? From Book Maranatha, page 301, we can read and decipher what's the meaning of that spirit is. Our personal identity is preserved in the resurrection. Though not the same particles of matter or material substances went into the grave, the wondrous works of God are a mystery to man. The spirit, the character of man is returned to God, there to be what? Preserved. In the resurrection, every man will have his own character. In fact, so much that we will be able to recognize each other. And as you can see here, we will bear the same individuality of features. Now, the first angel's message emphasizes this fact, that by beholding Christ, by talking of Him, by beholding the loveliness of His character, we become changed from glory to glory. And what is the glory? The character. And He becomes changed from character to character. Thus we see that there is a work of purification that goes on by beholding Jesus. Now there is another aspect of glory of God that the Bible mentions. We just singled out the first one, which is the character. Now if we will acquire that, we will see something more. And what is that? Let's look at these verses. John chapter 11. Jesus says unto her, said I not unto thee, that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? And he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. and he that was dead came forth. This is the ultimate prerogative of God, is not only to resurrect us spiritually, but also resurrect physically. And if we want to be partakers of this miracle, we have to be partakers in the first miracle as well. Galatians chapter 2. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Well, let's now look at the role of mind. There are two major roles of mind. Is physiological effect. It plays a role in prevention of diseases, regulates the function of different systems, and also there is behavioral aspect. The positive one, that exercising willpower, resistance to temptation, and the abnormal, when our will, where our mind becomes our enemy, and it does exactly the opposite of what we want, and it makes us miserable, even in the midst of the most comfortable conditions. Mind works as a clock, and it also puts in action our memories. So, circadian rhythm remembers mealtime, bedtime, etc. Our mind is the main clock, and it depends upon timing and schedule to regulate many processes in our body. Now, I want to briefly tell you a story about the seventh-day ox, and it has to do with one man, Ukrainian. He was sent to a labor camp back in Russia during the days of persecution. And he was assigned to carry water for the camp. In fact, that camp was without fence because it was so far in the Siberia that there was nowhere to run. And so he had to go for about several miles back and forth to the spring and to bring water, to haul water, under one condition. He said, I can do it, but give me rest on Sabbath. But the ox was old, and to meet the requirement, even under normal condition, the ox would barely make it hauling water every day. So to do it in 6 days was very challenging. And so as day was going after day, the man was afraid that he won't make it, and he will be put back into solitary incarceration. So when the Friday came, something came upon that ox, and the ox turned into a champion and was running back and forth that the man was barely catching up with him, and he met the daily requirement. And so that miracle was continually repeating for 10 years of that, as that man was serving his time in that labor camp for faith, just for faith, because he believed in God. He was sent to that prison camp, but he continued to keep the Sabbath there. Now, when the time came and the man was released, another stepped in, and he was assigned to the same duty. So, as the ox was carrying water for 6 days, and then the seventh day came, guess what? The ox went on strike, and nothing would move him to make even one step. And so that new worker was puzzled, and he was explained that that's what this ox was doing all these 10 years. He was resting on Sabbath day. So the habit is very important. When do we inculcate, when we train our children, before or after they become conscientious and learn how to make the decisions? Before. You train the child before he will make his own decisions, and then he will make decisions that you instilled in him, and you trained him. So we need to cooperate with the rhythms of our body to be successful. Emotional health. Poor emotional health can weaken our body's immune system, making us more likely to get colds and other infections during emotional difficult times. when we're feeling stressed, anxious, or upset, we may not take care of our health as well as we should. What are the signs of poor emotional health? Let's look at this. You may not feel like exercising, eating nutritious foods, doing something productive. People they turn to alcohol, tobacco, other drugs, sign of poor emotional health. And what about lack of desire to go to church? How many people would wake up in the morning and they would debate in their mind and look outside, how's the weather? Or find other justifications for not going today to church. Now the answer may be, it can be a sign of poor emotional health. Why? One of the reasons is that we are getting really tired. Really tired. And we need some time for Christian recreation. Happy people get sick less. And you can see this quote from Daily Telegraph, that what they found that people that are depressed, nervous, or angry are 3 times more likely to get sick than those who are energetic, happy, and relaxed. Carnegie Mellon University. Here's the quotation from first volume of Testimonies for the Church. All who can should feel it a duty to pursue this cause. She's referring to Christian recreation. Nothing will be lost but much gained. They can return to their occupation with new life and new courage to engage in their labor with zeal, and they are better prepared to what? To resist disease. Here's the God's messenger is talking about this as well. And another aspect of our mind that is at war with us when it comes to addictions. How many people at least have one addiction? Don't raise your hands. Addiction is a persistent, compulsive dependence on a behavior or substance. Now, we want to have good addictions. We want to be addicted to studying the Word. Did you see people who are passionate almost about anything? You know, some people like to collect flowers. Others, like to read the Bible. And so we want to have and occupy our mind as well as much as we can. Because, when temptation comes, I have a slide that is coming that compares where you'll see a bicycle. When it's easier to push a bicycle, when it stands or when it moves off balance. It's more difficult when the bicycle is moving, right? So what it tells us is that now the key for the resistance of temptation is to train certain current of thought. Certain current of thought. Now that doesn't take instantly. But you will notice that unless you're focused on something beforehand, when this temptation comes, you will fall. Very likely. Unless your mind was already occupied with something that is holy and uplifting. Today, doctors recognize addiction as a chronic disease that changes both brain structure and function. So this happens as the brain goes through a series of changes, beginning with recognition of pleasure and ending with a drive toward compulsive behavior. Basically, brain is telling us, I want it now, and I want it as soon as possible, and as much as I can get it. And the trick is that we cannot lie to ourselves. Our brain knows what is the shortcut to getting pleasure. Since birth, if we look at the children, we can see that the main motivation of their behavior is pleasure and gratification. This morning we had an illustration, beautiful illustration with sugar. Which taste do you think children give preference to since birth? Is the sweet. And the reason is because sugar actually increases the amount of serotonin, which is one of the hormones that makes us happy. And that's why, even when grown up, often we turn to something sweet when we are happy or when we are stressed out. Pleasure principle. By the way, I missed this illustration. Let me get back. Many of you probably heard about this experiment that was made on rats. So scientists, they took 2 groups of rats. And since they already figured out where the pleasure center is in the brain, they inserted the electrode in that center. And they connected it to electricity, and they were able to send weak electrical impulses to stimulate that brain to release the hormones that make a rat happy. And then they trained rat to actually push the pedal and to trigger that electrical current. And alternative pedal would release food. And the control group of rats, of course, was just a normal rats. Now, after about a quite short time, those rats, they quickly figure out where they get more pleasure from. And the group with the inserted electrode ignored the pedal with food, and every 5 seconds they would hit this pedal. You know why every 5 seconds? Because it would take about 5 seconds before the pleasure would begin to subside. And so they would have to hit it again to stimulate pleasure again. You know what was the end of that group of rats? They died. They died from starvation, even though the pedal with food was right next to them. This is exactly what the devil is trying to do with us. He knows how we made. He knows our inclination and the peculiarities of our brain function, and he's doing his best to turn us in just pleasure-loving creatures. And this is where that center is. So in the brain, pleasure has a distinct signature. The release of neurotransmitter dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, a cluster of nerve cells lying underneath the cerebral cortex, is the place that, upon stimulation, releases dopamine. Okay. So now, the fact is that it doesn't really matter what can stimulate it. I mean, some people like driving, and they will get the surge of dopamine. Others would like something sweet, or so food. Basically, many different factors can stimulate production of dopamine. And of course, the culprit is the abuse of drugs. Because when the drugs are consumed, the rewarding activity, as you can read here, will lead quickly to the speedy, intense, and reliable release of that hormone. That makes us feel good. It makes us feel good. Now, we met one young mother. She is about in her early 20s and already had 4 of her children taken from her. And at the time when we met her, because we were trying to adopt a child, remember, she had 2 more children that already were going through foster care with the candidates for adoption. Guess what was the problem with that mother? She would fail drug tests over and over again, and she would cry. You know, she would say, "I love my children." And so the judge's heart would be melted, and he would give her extension, and another extension, and another extension. But every time she would return with the positive drug test. That means drugs would be detected in her body. Because can meal even compete with the surge of the dopamine levels? Look at this. Cocaine can raise it by 500%, whereas good meal, only 35% from your baseline. I mean, who can compete with that? We talked with you about this ministry in Damascus Way. And the last night we heard about their testimonies. You know, it's very powerful because when they tell about their lives, there was about 13 women there. Just listening of one story, one broken life, I would listen and I would think, that's enough, I need just to go and digest that. But they would go one after another, and those just like listening the most horrible things. how life can be broken. But then I was trying to find there was something in common between them. And one thing that was in common, the loss of motivation for good things. They were not motivated to go and get education. They were not motivated to go and get normal job. They would find a way to get that quick satisfaction, which is drugs. In fact, one woman even told us that just to get her mind off and to get herself occupied, she went to work for a drug dealer and shuffling the drugs to Atlanta and off. Can you imagine to get your mind occupied, how much we can deceive ourselves? Of course, the real cause was to get the drugs. So our mind will be playing tricks with us because he knows where to get the satisfaction, and he will find justification, ways around to get it eventually. So here's an example where one of the psychologists at Princeton University was experimenting with sugar and fat, and he found that the effect was similar to heroin, where the diet of fats that consisted of about quarter sugar a day, upon withdrawal, the rats were thrown into a state of anxiety. Because it boosts this happy hormone, serotonin, that makes us feel good. It's an instant lift that we get from sugar. One of the reasons that we turn to it at times of celebration, on when we crave comfort and reward. Okay, what are the treatment options for us? Can we withdraw from addiction by thinking happy and being positive? You know, actually the science shows us the fact that by thinking happily and positively, we can increase amounts of those happy hormones. And then as they increase in turn, they help us to maintain that uplifting, happy, positive state of mind. And so we can put this way ourselves in the positive cycle rather than into the negative cycle, vicious cycle, where we go lower and lower and lower, and the only hope that men end up seeing is in the Prozac or other drugs. We should encourage a cheerful, hopeful, peaceful frame of mind, for our health depends upon our so doing. Testimony, studies on diet and foods. It would be well for us to spend a thoughtful hour each day in contemplation of the life of Christ. Desire Rages, page 83. How? We should take it point by point and let the imagination grasp each thing, especially the closing one. Now, you know what? This phrase, let imagination grasp each thing, is actually the most beautiful thing that a human being can desire. And you know why? Because we usually have to control our mind to stay in the right path. And just to relax and to let the mind flow, let the thoughts flow in the right direction based on the Bible and on the holy thoughts. That's the most beautiful thing that God can give to you and to me. And what shall be the result? As we thus dwell upon His great sacrifice for us, our confidence in Him will be more constant, our love will be quickened, and we shall be more deeply imbued with His Spirit. And this is the bicycle, standing versus rolling. The connection is so close between our imagination and faith. Let's look at this. Daily meditation is the very life blood of the soul. Our faith depends upon imagination. And of course, the enemy of God and enemy of human beings is trying to interfere with it, and he is trying to damage it because he knows that this is the most powerful tool that he has upon us, is the imagination. And we'll get to that in a minute. So these addictive drugs, they provide a shortcut to the brain's reward system by flooding the nuclear accumbens, which is the pleasure center, with dopamine, and then the hippocampus, which is the center for memories. That's where the memory is largely stored, lays down memories of this rapid sense of satisfaction. And then there is another center, it's called amygdala, creates a conditional response to certain stimuli. For example, if somebody sees if the drug addict sees the syringe, what his thought is going to be about this syringe. It's not about B vitamins injection, it's going to be a drug injection, right? Instantly, so he will crave for it. That's a conditional response called. Now, in good old days, the sweet tiredness and the sense of an accomplishment would bring that satisfaction. Research has shown that when you imagine an experience, you often have similar mental and physical responses to those you have when the event actually happens. In fact, the scientists are saying that our brain has difficulty to distinguish between what is imaginary and what is real. So you can, using your imagination, already today experience the new life, the life that is going to come. We have to learn how to put our troubles and worries into God's hands. And that leads us to the self-control. Flee fornication. Every sin that a man does is without the body, but he that committeth fornication sins against his own body. What know you not, that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which you have of God, and you are not own. And yet we are weak to do it on our own. Turn away my eyes from looking at vanity, and revive me in your way. So psalmist recognizes need to do away with vanity. He needs God help to accomplish it. And beside this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, that means moral goodness. And to virtue knowledge, knowledge about good things, spiritual things. And to knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, to patience godliness, to godliness brotherly kindness, to brotherly kindness charity, which is love. And in the Bible context, the word morals means abhorring evil and liking good, a reflection upon God's law. This is what the morals in the Bible context. Be not deceived. Evil communications corrupt good manners. Or another translation is, do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. There was a group of Canadian scientists that went to Romania, and they decided to compare the brain of the orphans, Romanian orphans, with the normal children, children that are raised in the families. The children that were raised in that orphanage had atypically larger amygdala volume and difficulties in emotion regulation. Now, I'll mention to you what does amygdala do. There is a part in our brain that is responsible for our action in the extreme situation. It's activated when we are afraid, when there is danger to our life, when we're really scared. And because, for example, if the train is coming and I'm standing on the railroad track, I mean, how much time do I have to think what to do and to evaluate the danger? Should I go or not? I will run away. And so sometimes this, now if we look into the brain, we will see that there is a switchboard, which is called thalamus in the brain. And as information comes and collects in that particular part of the brain, it is sent in two ways. One is sent, it's a longer pathway to the cortex, and another one, a shorter one, to the amygdala. And what happens is, this is a built-in preservation sense of preservation. Because, as I said, in the emergency situation, we often don't have time to think. We just need to act. And so we have this pattern of actions that are already stored in our mind that our brain addresses to when there is no time to think. You know, when Peter was challenged in the courtyard, he didn't have time to think. He acted on the programs that he had built into his brain. And praise God, we can see that that can be changed. We can be changed, and we can control with the cortex the behavior pattern that each one of us has. Because the day comes when we'll have to rely upon, very largely upon the willpower, not upon our instinct. And unfortunately, today, in many of us, it is the instinct of self-preservation that governs our actions. And we have known and believed the love that God has to us. God is love, and he that dwells in love dwells in God, and God in him. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Now, there is a condition called behavioral disorder, called oppositional defiant disorder. And let's look at them, even though they say it's about children. But maybe some of us can identify at least some of these statements. Throwing repeated temper tantrums. Excessively arguing with adults. This is about children. Actively refusing to comply with requests and rules. Deliberately trying to annoy or upset others, or being easily annoyed by others. Blaming others for your mistakes. Having frequent outbursts of anger and resentment. Being spiteful and seeking revenge. Swearing, using obscene language, saying mean and hateful things when upset. Another somatic disorder, somatic symptom disorder, is called hypochondria. You know, sometimes people say, well, he's hypochondriac. What does that mean? It refers to worry about having a serious illness. This debilitating condition is the result of an inaccurate perception of the condition of body or mind despite the absence of actual medical condition. Believing that I'm sick can make me feel sick. There was one man I read some time ago. He would always go to the hospital, and he would stay in the hospital because he believed that he was sick. And so almost all year round, he was in the hospital. And doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him. There is also a condition that is called phantom pain. How many of you heard about phantom pain? Phantom pain, I'll give you an example. The pain is actually not felt in the extremity. For example, if I cut my finger, the pain is not in the finger. The pain is in the brain. It is brain the ones that perceives the pain. And now, this feeling of pain is actually disturbing for us. It's disturbing for the brain. And if it's just a mild pain, our brain is capable to shut it down and ignore it. Now, is it a good thing or bad thing? When it comes to heart attacks, the statistics tells us that men have heart attacks more often than women, but women die more often than men. Guess why? Because women have higher tolerance to pain. You know, God made women tough for a reason. And they are prone to ignore the symptoms of impending heart attack. They ignore the symptoms of angina pectoris, the chest pain, because this is how they are. But that's a disadvantage when it comes to the symptoms of a heart attack. Whereas men, they're different. Man feels a little pain, he needs to take care of that. This is how generally we are. And so that's why men survive more often heart attacks than women. And so what brain does, it suppresses the pain impulses, both in men and women. And then upon withdrawal of the pain symptom, let's say I had some inflammation in my intestines, and let's say I felt some pain, but then the pain is gone, but my brain still is trying to compensate and act like there is a pain still there. So I may be hurting in the absence of the stimulus. This is how brain works. Can you believe it? That you can experience pain when there is none actually such. So believing that I am sick can make me sick. There is great need in love. Great need of love of every human being. We're emphasizing and re-emphasizing it in Uchee Pines, and the Bible does the same thing. That the greatest need of the human heart is the need of love. Everybody wants to be loved. And we need the love from those around us. We need the assurance of God's love to us. But the problem is that we begin to try to love ourselves. And this desire of our love to ourselves becomes so strong that it suppresses everything else. Habitual negative thinking can lead to psychological disorders, anxiety, depression, panic attacks, phobias due to pro-inflammatory cytokines. This is now a medical journal that brings out this interesting thought, that the negative thinking actually pro-inflammatory. Can you believe it? Just because I'm always negative, I'm picking on people, or I'm unhappy with my conditions, and first I find something negative. Actually, I'm increasing the inflammation in my body. It's exactly the opposite from being happy and focusing on good things. That's actually suppressing inflammation. That was a big revelation to me. I don't know. Now, there is also some physiological differences between women and men. Did you know that women need a little more sleep than men? When I worked at a health food store, one of the common complaints that people would come, they would say, "I'm so tired. Do you have something for me?" And the market with the supplements is ready to offer the whole array of things for you to make you feel better without looking into health laws and changing of the lifestyle. Here's one bottle, here's another bottle, try it. But the first question I would ask is, how much sleep do you get? And often they would say, well, I go to bed. After work, people come, they need to watch some TV until about 1 a.m., and then they go to bed, and they wake up 5:30 because they need to go to work. And this goes week after week, month after month, and that literally makes people close to insanity. And it may sound simple to you, but they don't see the connection. They don't see the connection. So this researcher pointed out that women tend to multitask and use more of the actual brain than men, leading to greater need for sleep. So essentially, the more you use your brain during the day, the more it needs to rest while asleep. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men, instructing us to deny ungodliness and worldly desires, and to live sensibly, righteous, and godly in the present age. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5. So with these words, I would want to conclude this presentation to you, and just elaborating the importance of this connection between mind and body. We all know that the body has a direct effect on our mind, but not very often we talk about the impact that our mind has not only on our behavior, but actually on the health of our body. Now, as we continue this weekend, you'll hear more and more presentations in this afternoon about diabetes, cancer, hypertension, that hopefully will be beneficial unto you. And you will discover new things and apply and re-emphasize things that you already know. Thank you very much.